late 80s and early 90s were a tense time in the forests of the Pacific Northwest.
This is American National Forest! We yield no more! Earth first!
The controversies are very big. The trade-offs are very big.
For several years, conflict over the northern spotted owl had been building as the federal government weighed whether to provide protections for the bird. Timber towns feared the worst.
What's going to happen to Sweet Home?
What's going to happen? Sweet Home is going to die.
Their range extends from northern California to British Columbia, and they primarily feed on small mammals like mice, gophers, and tree voles.
Here he comes.
Spotted owls can grow to nearly 2 feet tall, and they usually have the same mate throughout their lives.
Oh, there she is.
Raising their young in tree cavities of forests hundreds of years old. And it's there, among the Northwest old growth, that pressure began building in the 80s to protect their rapidly diminishing habitat.
No cuts! No cuts!
Environmental advocates took to the woods,
If the logs move, we asphyxiate and die.
blocking roads and camping in trees to protest timber sales. Forestry workers rallied in small towns and big cities around the region, fearful for their jobs and their way of life.
That means I'll lose a business if they don't have the lumber industry anymore.
My dad is a forester, and my brother's a forester. My mom is a master woodland manager, and my family owns and manages about 400 acres in Oregon. So we know a lot about forestry and wildlife.
Today, Fran Cafferata is a wildlife biologist who consults for timber companies. But back then, she was a little girl, worried her father would lose his job.
You know, I just remember it being really a scary time.
BLM was nice enough to leave this little small patch of old growth.
At the same time, Doug Hyken was just starting his career as a lawyer with the environmental group that would go on to become Oregon Wild.
As a native Oregonian, I was a bit jaded about clear cuts, didn't think there was much I could do about it, but when I learned later that, we were driving species to extinction or near to extinction, and there was something we could do about it, it really changed my views.
Worked on forest issues, old growth timber harvest, spotted owls.
And Paul Henson, a wildlife biologist, was working out of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Office in Portland.
When I first came on, there were people climbing up trees and camping in the trees. In fact,
Henson, who would go on to become Oregon State Supervisor for the agency, didn't have to look far to see the conflict.
There was a guy who roped up and camped outside of our office window, 3 stories up above ground, to protest. And so it was very acrimonious, very passionate. People were chaining themselves to trees or to trucks. There was a lot of altercation, a lot of ill will, a lot of fighting.
The biggest threat facing spotted owls at the time?
The main original issue for the spotted owl's decline was habitat loss due to massive clear-cutting of the older forests in the Pacific Northwest.
Old-growth forests are some of the most complex ecosystems in the world, home to towering conifers, lush understories, and a vast array of wildlife, including the spotted owl.
It's got huge trees that are well over 200 years old. It has a variety of ages of trees, different sizes, different species. It has a diverse understory with deciduous shrubs that provide great habitat for birds.
After more than a century of aggressive logging, old-growth forests were disappearing quickly.
Imagine the state of Oregon with virtually no old-growth forests. That's the trajectory we're on in the 70s and 80s.
But those same forests also served as the main economic driver for many of the Northwest small towns, where mills were often the central hub of the community.
I used to ride my bike to the store, a little corner store with my best friend, and we would sit outside with our little Jolly Rancher candies, and we would talk about it. It was what was being talked about around the dinner table. My dad was in forestry, her dad drove a log truck, and I was so scared that my dad would lose his job. He was the breadwinner for our family.
In 1990, after years of conflict, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service finally made a decision.
Good Friday morning, it's 8:30 in Sweet Home. This is KFIR News. I'm Cindy Riley reporting. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service made its expected announcement about listing the northern spotted owl as a threatened species this morning.
The designation as a threatened species meant the government had found that without a significant change to logging practices, the owl could face extinction. It was unwelcome news in timber communities where "Save a Logger, Eat an Owl" was splashed across t-shirts and bumper stickers.
Why should the owl be protected 100% and a way of life not?
You bet I'm scared. There's a reason to be afraid. They're talking 28,000 jobs related. Well, that's a bunch of baloney. There's thousands more than that.
With the owl finally protected, the government still needed a plan for how to save it. In 1994, that came in the form of the Northwest Forest Plan. It set aside roughly 10 million acres of federal land, protecting old growth, encouraging younger forests to develop, and providing buffers near rivers and streams.
You know, during the Reagan years, the last of the big old forests on federal land were being liquidated. You know, you're talking 200, 300, 400-year-old trees that, you know, your kids and my kids, you know, have as much legacy right to as anyone else, and not as 2x4s. The Northwest Forest Plan stopped that. It put the brakes on that.
But with all that land now mostly off limits to logging, some of Cafarata's fears came true.
It had a tremendous impact on the timber industry that was scary for me.
Between 1989 and 1995, timber harvest on federal land fell by roughly 90%. But there were also other issues at play. Mechanization meant that fewer timber workers were needed, and smaller mills were being shuttered in favor of fewer, larger operations.
There was a tremendous decline in housing starts and the price of timber was going down. So it's a complicated issue. The spotted owl got most of the blame because it was easy to blame them. And it was undeserved. It definitely had an impact, but not as bad as a lot of the timber industry folks like to say.
But for Heiken and other environmental advocates, the Northwest Forest Plan was a game changer.
It's an ecosystem plan. It's not just a spotted owl plan. It's going to be good for spotted owls, for salmon, for marbled murrelets that live in the Coast Range, and for all the other species that live in our old growth forest.
And that had always been the end goal, even when protesters were camping out in the forests in the late 1980s.
The owl has worked because laws protect species. There is no federal law that protects the forest. There ought to be.
After 30 years under the Northwest Forest Plan, you might think spotted owls would be thriving. But that has not been the case. At monitoring stations in Oregon, Washington, and California, federal researchers watched spotted owl populations continue to plummet between 1995 and 2017.
It would be the female.
In some places, by as much as 80%.
Yeah.
And much of that decline was because of the barred owl, a larger and more aggressive owl native to the East Coast that began showing up in the Northwest as early as the 1970s.
They are territorial species, and so they kind of bump each other out of these ideal habitats. And the spotted owl is just a little bit smaller, just a little bit less aggressive, and the barred owl is kind of the king of the roost and tends to, you know, push the spotted owl into less ideal habitat.
Heiken says that as the spotted owl deals with this new threat, preserving habitat is more important than ever.
You have these territorial species that compete with each other for the same habitat, and for them to coexist, we need more habitat, not less. You know, if your in-laws are going to move into your house, you don't want to make your house smaller, you need to make your house bigger.
Tensions around the spotted owl have cooled significantly since the heated days of the 1990s.
Yeah, I think that
Cafarata now works with timber companies to figure out ways to harvest trees with wildlife in mind.
So we want there to be young trees, we want there to be middle-aged trees, we want there to be older trees, we want there to be a mosaic. So we're really looking for ways that we can connect habitats and allow species to live out their life histories.
And she says it's a misconception that timber companies are only looking to clear-cut as much forest as possible.
We are stewards of the forest, we care for it, and we want it to be there for us, we want it to be there for future generations and for everybody's enjoyment.
For Heiken, he knows the fate of the spotted owl remains in doubt.
So success for this endeavor is going to be humans showing great restraint and not logging for 100 years. If we just slip up for a decade, we're going to lose a tremendous amount of valuable habitat.
But that hasn't made him any less resolute in his determination to protect it.
So when we are saving the spotted owl, we're not only saving a bird, but we're saving ourselves.